welcome into the fantasy recap. We're actually going to skip the recap part of it today because we got more important things to deal with. Looking at playoff seeding and playoff scenarios today, and we have this full-on chart to help everyone out. So, as was mentioned in the chat, Bonk cannot catch up to myself or Reed because even if he ties, he can't possibly catch up on the tiebreaker, which is wins versus all teams. So our playoff is set. It is Chris, Doug, Aiden, myself, and Reed. The order of that, as you can see, is not set. So that is a big one to deal with in week 12. And then the 6th seed will play the 7th seed in week 13. The loser of that game will go to the last place semifinals. So in week 13, we will have a play-in game, seed 4 versus seed 5. Winner goes to the 4-team semifinals. And then in that same week, week 13, we'll also have a 6 versus 7 game. Loser of that goes to the last place semifinals to be played in the same weeks as the semifinals. And then also in week 13, we'll have a 1 versus 2 game. Winner gets to choose their opponent for the semifinals. Loser of the 6v7 game also gets to choose their opponent for the last place semifinals. But we'll just go team by team and get into the scenarios. So Chris has already locked up the 1 seed. He'll be playing in the 1v2 game, week 13. For Doug, if Doug wins, he gets the 2 seed. So that's pretty cut and dry. And then if Doug loses, and then Alexander and Bonk both win, then Doug gets the 3 seed. The 3 seed has a bye week 13, doesn't do anything, just waiting for the semifinal matchups to play out. So 3 seed gets you automatically into the semifinals. And so if Doug loses, Alexander and Bonk win, then Doug gets the 3 seed. If Doug loses and myself beats Alexander and Bonk wins, then there's a tiebreaker between me and Doug for the 3 seed. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then if Doug loses and Reed wins, then Doug will be playing in that 4v5 game. This right here, if you don't see a number in there, but you just see a color that correlates with the bottom here, that means there's a tiebreaker, but it doesn't matter because 4 and 5 seed are essentially the same. 1 and 2 are essentially the same. 6 and 7, and so on. So if you don't see a number, that just means you don't know what exact seed you're going to be, but you're going to be playing in that game. So yeah, there is that. And then for Aiden, kind of same scenario with Aiden. If Aiden wins, he is into the 1v2 game. He'll be sitting at the 2 seed. If he loses, then if myself and Bonk win, then there will be a tiebreaker between Aiden and myself. I'll get into that a little bit later also. And then if Aiden loses and Alexander and Bonk both win, then he is the 3 seed. For me, if I lose, I am 5 seed. That's pretty easy, cut and dry. And then if I win, I would also need Reed to lose, and then get a tiebreaker between either myself and Doug or myself and Aiden. For So let's get into those tiebreakers now, because those have been all mentioned. So for the tiebreaker between Aiden and myself, because the tiebreaker is wins versus all, and then the second tiebreaker, if that is tied, would be points for. But Aiden does have more points for than me right now, currently. So for Aiden to win the tiebreaker, he has to put at least 2 teams in between his score and my score. So he would get the win over me in the win versus all column. And then he would get 2 more wins to tie me in wins versus all. And then he has more points than I do, so he would obviously be winning that tiebreaker. If he puts 3 teams or 4 teams in between his score and my score, that would also give him the 3 seed, just at least 2 teams for him to win the tiebreaker. And then if I'm tied with Doug, Doug would need to also put at least 2 teams between his score and my score. But if he puts exactly 1 team between his score and my score, then he would have to outscore me by 30.54 points or more to get that 3 seed. And in those scenarios, both of those scenarios, it is pretty highly unlikely that Aiden or Doug would win the tiebreaker, because Aiden would have to put at least 2 teams between his score and mine, or Doug 2 teams, or potentially 1 team between his score and mine. But Aiden and Doug, in those scenarios where the tiebreaker is happening, they have already lost that game. So they would have a losing score to the other team. It would just depend, and I have already won. So it would depend on if their losing score is higher by a decent amount than my winning score. So it's pretty unlikely that Doug and Aiden would win that tiebreaker, but it is possible. For Reed, pretty easy. Reed wins. He's a 3 seed. He's in the semifinals. And if he loses, he is in the 4v5 play-in game, either with the 4 or 5 seed, but it doesn't matter. So it's just win or lose for Reed. He doesn't have to look at any other games. Other games will determine his opponent if you were to lose. But if he wins, then it does not matter. All right, those are our playoffs. So now down to the bottom. For Ryan and Eric, they play each other in this rivalry week, week 12. And that's a big game. Whoever loses is automatically in the last place semifinals, as you can see, the alternating here. Whoever loses is automatically in the last place semifinals. And then most of the scenarios, except for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the winner is in the 6v7 game. But then there's also tiebreaker scenarios where if Todd wins, and all of these scenarios are Todd winning. So if Todd loses, then the loser of this game is in the last place semifinals, and the winner of this game is in the 6v7 game. But if Todd wins, then we have a different scenario. In this case, that the 2 are tied, Ryan and Todd, for the 7 seed. Bonk would already be in the 6v7 game. The biggest benefit to getting the 6v7 game is you, instead of having only 2 chances to get yourself out of the punishment, you have 3 chances. So if you're in the last place semifinals, you have to win 1 of 2 games to get yourself out of that last place punishment. If you're in the 6v7 game, you have to win 1 of 3 games. So you have a better chance to stay out of that punishment, because you have more chances to win. But in that scenario, for Todd to win the tiebreaker, over Ryan. And this is true for also the 6th seed here. Whenever Todd is tied with Ryan, for Todd to win that tiebreaker, he would have to put 7 teams between his score and Ryan's score, or put exactly 6 teams between them and outscore Ryan by 54.7. That's going to be extremely difficult. This will be the toughest tiebreaker that it has the least likelihood to happen for Todd, because in the scenarios where Todd is tied with Ryan, Ryan has already won the game. So Todd needs to put 7 teams between his score and Ryan's score. Todd can't put himself between them. He can't put Ryan between them. And Ryan has already won his game. So there's at least one score that's below Ryan's. So whoever that score is, it'd be Eric, because Ryan had already won the game in that scenario. He couldn't put Eric's score between them. There's only 10 teams in the league, and that's 3 teams. So he would have to put every other score in between them. He would have to score the highest of the week, and then Ryan would have to win scoring the second lowest of the week. If he doesn't do that, if Todd scores the highest and Ryan scores the third lowest, or if Todd scores the second highest and Ryan scores the second lowest, then Todd would need to outscore Ryan by 54.7, which is feasible, given that Todd would be such a big difference between his score and Ryan's, but he would have to basically put every single team between his score and Ryan's score in that scenario. And then for Todd to win a tiebreaker over Eric, it's a little bit easier, but still difficult. He would have to put at least 5 teams between his score and Eric's score, and Eric has also won in that scenario. So there would only be 7 teams left. He would have to put 5 of the 7 teams between his score and Eric's score, or put exactly 4 teams in between them, and then outscore Eric by 22.86 or more, which is feasible, but it's a lot of teams. And then for the 3-way ties, there's a 3-way tie right here between Ryan, Bonk, and Todd, and there's a 3-way tie right here between Eric, Bonk, and Todd. In the 3-way tie between Ryan, Bonk, and Todd, whoever has the higher score between Bonk and Ryan is in. So in this scenario, Bonk and Ryan are both kind of playing a pseudo second game against each other. So whoever has a higher score is in. For Todd to get in, he would have to either beat Ryan on that same tiebreaker that I already mentioned over Ryan, or he would have to do the same thing to Bonk's score, put 7 teams in between them, or put 6 teams in between them and score 35.8 more points than Bonk. So it's a little bit easier to beat Bonk in the tiebreaker, but that's still very unlikely for Todd. And then in the tiebreaker between Eric, Bonk, and Todd, he would have to win the tiebreaker over either Eric or Bonk, which is what I described earlier. Bonk is 7 teams or 6 and 35.8, and Eric is 5 teams or 4 and 22.86. If he doesn't do that, if he doesn't beat either of those 2 in the tiebreaker, Eric and Bonk both make it. If he does beat one of those 2, then Eric would have to put at least 2 teams between his score and Bonk's score to make it over Bonk, or put exactly 1 team in between and outscore him by 12.94 or more. That's if Todd somehow wins that tiebreaker. And then those scenarios right here are the exact same as here. And then this entire top half of scenarios here, all the way down to here, I think. Yep, all the way down to there. is exactly the same down here because the game between Alexander and myself does not matter for any of these standings here. So yeah, and then moving on to Bonk, same thing with the tiebreakers that I already said, but he can basically lock up a 6 seed in the 6v7 game if he wins. And then if he loses, there's also more opportunities for him to lock up that 6v7 game, even just with other stuff happening, even though he lost. And then for Todd, he would have to. Todd is basically like pretty much dead in the water. I mean, the easiest way for Todd to get in would probably be the tiebreaker over Eric in this scenario and this scenario here. But that's still not, the easiest thing of all time to do, to put 5 teams between his score and Eric's. But if he doesn't do that, then Todd will also be in the last place semifinals with Alexander, and then the loser of the Ryan-Eric game, and then whoever loses that 6v7 game, that will be scheduled week 13. So yeah, that concludes that. If there are any questions about this, I'm going to put this in the chat, save it to your photos so that you can, look at this during the week. If there's any questions about it or anything like that, let me know. And then remember that the trade deadline is kickoff of the Lions game this Thursday, when trades can happen all the way up till kickoff of the Lions-Packers game on Thanksgiving. So remember that trade deadline. Also remember that to set your lineups, we have 3 Thanksgiving games, so remember to set your lineups, and we will see you next week for the playoff brackets.